Welcome back to Niaga AWANI. Trump's tariffs have significantly impacted exporters, particularly in countries like Malaysia, and the tariff have led to higher production costs due to increased prices for imported intermediate goods, which are essential for many industries such as electronics and automotive. This rise in cost forces exporters to either absorb the losses or raise their prices, making their products less competitive in the global market. Additionally, foreign retaliation in the form of counter-tariff has further complicated access to key export markets, creating additional barriers for exporters. With me right now, Thenesh Kannaa, Executive Director of TraTax, to discuss further on this issue. First of all, I'm not sure you've never commented, or before you never comment yet on the Trump's tariff in Astro AWANI in our show. Maybe first of all, your reaction after lots of uncertainties announced by Donald Trump, your thoughts on this issue and how it will impact to the ecosystem and also businesses, especially in Malaysia.
Thank you for having me. I think it was jaw-dropping, I would say, because a century ago, tariffs were a major source of revenue for most governments.
Yeah.
But today, it is regarded as a mode of trade diplomacy. Main source of revenue is from income tax and all that. So this is going back to a very interesting time. And also to have different tariff for different countries based on what appears to be a simplified formula is very unprecedented. It caught a lot of people by surprise, including myself.
Yeah, Thenesh, maybe your thoughts. Does Malaysia really impose high tariffs on US goods as claimed by President Trump at the Liberation Day announcement? Is it, he mentioned that Malaysia was charged them 47%. Your comment on that?
Okay, I think Malaysian tariff rate on imported goods, if you look good by goods, each product, we have tariff code, 11,000 tariff codes. Some goods are 10%, many are 0. Some exceptional cars and all a bit higher, but generally 10 or 0. So the average rate is about 5.6%. But as they say with anything, right, the interesting detail is always in the fine print. So when they put Malaysia 47% in the president's announcement card too, you look at the title of the column, it talks about tariff and impact of non-tariff measure. So they use that fine print to then calculate 47%, which essentially represents the trade deficit. And one day before the Liberation Day announcement, US released a report on explaining what they regard as non-tariff measures for US businesses across the world, including a chapter for Malaysia in there.
Thenesh, I would like to bring our discussion into companies, players, industrial players. How can Malaysian companies actually, especially that export to US, minimize the tariff exposure? Currently is give a flat rate 10%, but our Malaysian representative are heading to US right now for negotiation. Companies, how they can minimize the exposure?
I think that's a very good question because we have to focus on what's on our control. There's a lot of things happening there, and of course there's a government-to-government discussion and all that. But as a business, as an exporter, what's in my control right now on immediate terms, right? So if you have to make an export today to the US, we understand tariff is 10%, and the 10% is calculated as rate multiplied by value. Then the question is how to get the value as competitive as possible. So a general thought process is if I sell something to the US for 100, the duty would be $10. But that's not always true. We have to follow the customs valuation rules. And US customs valuation rule is a bit more liberal from many other countries. So as an example, they allow exclusions for freight and insurance costs, even logistics costs, warehousing costs, all that, which is very different from many countries because many countries will impose the tariff, the import duty on the landed cost of the goods. We call it CIF value in technical terms. But US is different. They allow the logistic costs, freight costs, insurance costs to be excluded from the base. But for that, you must have the documentation proper. So what I'm saying is, with a proper documentation, when your invoice is for 100, you could get 10% on 90 or 80 rather than 10% on the entire 100. So that preparation, documentation must be there. So that's one example. Another example, still on the valuation point, is a lot of time what happens is, as a manufacturer in Malaysia, the manufacturer doesn't export directly to US. We use a trading company in the US, in Malaysia. So let's say X Sdn Bhd sell to Y Sdn Bhd, Y Sdn Bhd export to US. X could sell to Y at 80, and Y could be exporting to US at 100. So US adopts this first rule approach, whereby with right documentation, they allow the 10% to be imposed on the 80 rather than 100. But for all this, the Malaysian exporter must do correct preparation, documentation, and liaise with the shipping and aircraft, the shipping agent to make sure that's translated into real savings. One more thing on your point just now you mentioned is, it's a very interesting point, right? A lot of US exports, a lot of it may not be Malaysian headquartered companies. It can be Malaysian companies, but they could be investors of MNCs, particularly investors of US, which is a lot. So then you have situation where goods are imported from the US into Malaysia as raw material, and then further processing is done and finished goods is sent back to the US. So in this case, the tariff Liberal Day announcement, there's a full executive order that comes with it. That executive orders allows the tariff to be only on the Malaysian value add, excluding the value of the raw material imported from the US. So again, documentation, tracing, software preparation, all that is needed to enjoy that. So with all this, right, 10% could effectively mean far less than 10%. Because your invoice value and the value on which the tariff is imposed may be different, could be lower when we follow all these techniques, which are given by the US, but we must have proper documentation to capitalize on these benefits. That's number one. Number two, as we know, certain sectors are excluded from this tariff, reciprocal tariff. So that is at a broad level, but to actually enjoy the benefit, you must use the correct tariff code. So again, the tariff code, there's a lot of chapter notes, section notes, and all those things to be followed. The same product sometimes can have different tariff code depending on whether it's used for A or B and all that. So that's a very technical area. Again, trade and customs specialists, tax accountants can come in to advise on that, and that can bring down the tariff to 0% for certain goods.
That sounds good, basically. Thenesh, one more issue that concern, especially among industrial players, is about dumping of goods from China. Could China manufacturers simply reroute goods through Malaysia to benefit from the lower tariffs compared to other countries, or there will be a big issue on goods dumping all products from China that cannot enter to US, then they divert it to Malaysia, for example?
Okay, I think that's a very interesting question. Maybe I split that question into two aspects, final product and intermediate product. Okay, so final product is consumer goods. So of course, end of the day, US consumer market, if you look at it, the population is over 300 million. The world population is about just below 5% of the world population. But of course, their spending power is higher, right?
Spending power is higher.
So when you factor it in, is there. So then for finished goods, if you don't export to US, question is, what does China do with excess capacity, right? Of course, they want to boost domestic consumption. We saw this announcement from the Chinese government earlier this week. They want to boost domestic consumption. But in addition to that, it's widely expected that they may flood the other markets. And of course, ASEAN, China, we have a free trade agreement. So we also don't impose import duty on those imported goods there. So that concern is there, it's valid. And that is where even a Malaysian SME that is not involved in export will have to monitor the situation, because it affects of the imported products there, right? And of course, not just that. Even if you're a Malaysian company and you're exporting, but you're exporting only to Europe, for example, you still have to factor in this because China's excess capacity will affect the third country market. So it kind of changes the dynamics. Also, the currency dynamic changes. So a lot of things to monitor there. Then the other aspect is intermediary goods. So should we expect a lot more intermediary goods, which means not finished goods, but semi-processed goods from China to Malaysia, to be further processed in Malaysia, to be sent to US because our tariffs are lower than what is being imposed on China. I pun, once it's over 100%, we don't need to monitor already lah. It's very high already.
Yes.
So then, in those kind of things, we have to see, in order to be regarded as originate from Malaysia, generally some amount of manufacture must happen in Malaysia, certain value add must be in Malaysia, and there's also a process to obtain the origin certificate from MITI.
Yeah.
And we must also bear in mind the origin rule in US is a bit unique as compared to the rest of the world. So those things have to be factored in for Malaysian companies who are part of our MNE group and or even a SME who's working closely with a Chinese exporter to tap into this kind of options.
With current uncertainties and based on your experience, how long does it take typically for like exporters to do some adjustment, maybe in terms of their supply chains and also their operational and also financial way of doing business with these uncertainties and with adjustment on policies? Typically, like how long does it take for the industrial player, especially exporters who really involved in this very dynamic ecosystem right now?
Well, if you really want to put it into the software, it takes months, right? But as I always say, for matters like this, you have to look at it step by step. So first of all, a lot of orders have been front-loaded. A lot of exports have already been front-loaded and sent before the Liberal Day announcement. So volumes, as I gather from my clients now, are not at the peak.
Okay.
Because as far as they can, they've done that already. Of course, there are also some that are picking now because they want to maximize the 90 days period, taking into account the logistics lead time.
Right.
Okay? But what I'm saying is you have to look at the techniques that I mentioned, quite a few, which one is the most relevant and what is the most essential thing to do that, and then put in the process for that first. So at least you go for the big saving first, and then from there it is step by step we maximize and also we incorporate it into the system. Because we can't straight away say that, okay, get the IT system ready, then only we want to go for the... No, you go for the low-hanging fruits, the most important ones, and then once the process is standardized, then we put into the system.